Almost half of all dementia cases worldwide may be preventable. Not 10%, not a small minority, nearly half. And perhaps the most frightening part is that cognitive decline often begins silently. Years before anyone around the person notices something is wrong. The brain does not suddenly collapse overnight. In many cases, it deteriorates gradually through a chain of overlooked habits, untreated medical conditions, chronic inflammation, sensory deprivation, and invisible biological stress accumulating over decades. The 2024 report from the Lancet Commission identified 14 modifiable risk factors connected to approximately 45% of dementia cases globally. 14 separate points where the trajectory may still be changed before severe cognitive decline fully develops. And the first warning sign most people ignore is hearing loss. For many adults, worsening hearing feels like a simple inconvenience of aging. Voices become harder to follow in crowded rooms. Television volume slowly increases. Conversations become exhausting. Families adapt without questioning it. But modern neuroscience reveals something far more serious happening underneath the surface. The brain depends on constant stimulation to maintain neural networks. Auditory signals help keep language centers, memory systems, emotional processing, and social cognition active continuously. When hearing deteriorates and remains untreated, those regions begin receiving less stimulation, and the brain follows a brutal biological rule. Unused pathways weaken. Over time, neural activity decreases, connections shrink, cognitive load rises because the brain must work harder simply to interpret incomplete sound information. Mental fatigue increases, communication becomes stressful. Then social withdrawal begins. People stop joining conversations because constantly asking others to repeat themselves becomes embarrassing and exhausting. Calls become shorter, gatherings become rarer, isolation slowly expands, and social isolation itself is an independent dementia risk factor. One problem quietly feeds another. Multiple studies from 2022 and 2023 linked untreated hearing loss to roughly a 50% increase in dementia risk. That is not a subtle effect. It makes hearing one of the strongest modifiable neurological risk factors identified so far. This is why specialists increasingly emphasize that hearing aids are not cosmetic devices associated with aging. They are brain protection tools. The same principle applies to vision. Roughly 80% of the sensory information processed by the brain enters through the eyes. When vision deteriorates gradually, the brain again begins receiving reduced stimulation from the outside world. And perhaps one of the most striking findings in recent dementia research involves cataract surgery. Cataracts slowly cloud the lens of the eye, making vision appear foggy, dim, or blurred. Because the change develops gradually, many people normalize it and delay treatment for years. But research cited by the Lancet Commission found that timely cataract surgery may reduce dementia risk by nearly 29%. Almost one-third. That statistic changes the entire conversation surrounding aging and cognition. Eyes and brain are not separate systems functioning independently. They are deeply interconnected components of the same neurological network. Reduced sensory input weakens cognitive stimulation over time. And then there is sleep. Perhaps the most underestimated neurological maintenance process in the human body. Millions of people convince themselves poor sleep is simply part of getting older. They wake repeatedly during the night, sleep lightly, struggle with insomnia, and accept exhaustion as unavoidable aging. But biologically, poor sleep may be slowly damaging the brain in ways most people never realize until years later. Because deep sleep is not passive rest, it is neurological cleaning. Every night, while most people believe the brain is simply resting, one of the most important biological maintenance systems in the human body activates quietly in the dark. Scientists call it the glymphatic system. Think of it as the brain's overnight sanitation network, responsible for flushing metabolic waste products out of delicate neural tissue while you sleep. During deep sleep phases, cerebrospinal fluid circulates through the brain more efficiently, washing away toxic proteins that accumulated during waking hours. Among those proteins are beta amyloid and tau, the same substances that become the hallmark microscopic features of Alzheimer's disease. When sleep becomes fragmented, shortened, or chronically poor, that cleaning cycle weakens. The waste does not clear properly. Night after night, small amounts remain behind. Then more accumulates. Then more again. Researchers studying living human subjects have demonstrated that even a single sleepless night can measurably disrupt amyloid and tau regulation inside the brain. One night. Now imagine the neurological effect of poor sleep repeated for 10 or 15 years. The terrifying part is that most people never connect those sleepless nights in midlife with cognitive decline appearing decades later. The damage develops silently, gradually, invisibly, but the biological link is becoming harder for science to ignore, and modern life may be making the situation dramatically worse, because one of the most destructive sleep disruptors now sits inches from millions of faces every night. The smartphone. Blue light emitted from screens interferes directly with melatonin production, the hormone responsible for signaling the body that nighttime has arrived. Inside the brain, a region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus acts as the body's master biological clock. Blue light tricks that system into believing it is still daytime. Melatonin drops, sleep onset delays, deep restorative sleep weakens, and the brain loses valuable cleaning time. Then comes the psychological layer. People consume alarming news, arguments, financial fears, political outrage, and emotionally stimulating content moments before attempting sleep. The nervous system responds as if danger is present. Cortisol rises, adrenaline increases, the brain shifts into vigilance instead of recovery. Thought loops begin, rumination, replay of worries, conversations, fears, unfinished tasks. The body lies in bed motionless while the brain continues operating like it is under attack. And over years, chronic sleep disruption becomes deeply entangled with cognitive decline, depression, cardiovascular disease, and inflammatory damage throughout the nervous system. This is why sleep specialists increasingly recommend strict nighttime behavioral boundaries. Screens away at least 45 to 60 minutes before bed. Consistent sleep schedules, longer exhalation breathing patterns to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, progressive muscle relaxation to reduce physical tension. Simple interventions, yet biologically powerful ones. But perhaps one of the most surprising discoveries in dementia prevention research has nothing to do with sleep at all. It involves muscle. Most people think muscles exist primarily for movement or physical appearance. Few realize skeletal muscle also functions as an endocrine organ, releasing signaling molecules known as myokines directly into circulation during physical activity. These molecules influence inflammation, blood flow, neurogenesis, and even communication between brain cells. In other words, muscles actively help protect the brain. And after the age of 30 to 35, muscle mass begins declining naturally. After 50, that loss accelerates dramatically. By 80, some individuals may lose nearly half of their peak muscle tissue. This process, known as sarcopenia, is not merely cosmetic aging. It is neurological aging too. Less muscle means fewer beneficial myokines, lower circulation efficiency, higher inflammatory burden, reduced metabolic stability, less stimulation supporting brain resilience over time. A major 2025 study strengthened evidence that sarcopenia itself contributes causally to cognitive decline. While regular physical activity directly helps interrupt that progression, which means movement is not only protecting joints and the heart, it may be helping preserve memory itself. One of the most dangerous misconceptions about dementia is the belief that cognitive decline begins only with memory loss. In reality, the brain often starts revealing trouble much earlier through movement, coordination, and balance. A person becomes slightly unsteady while walking. They sway subtly when standing on one foot. They begin reaching for walls or furniture more often without consciously realizing it. Most families blame blood pressure, weak legs, aging joints, or just getting older. But neurologists increasingly understand that balance and cognition are deeply connected because they rely on overlapping brain regions. The cerebellum, responsible for coordination and balance, communicates constantly with the frontal lobes, the same areas involved in planning, judgment, focus, and executive function. When early neurodegenerative changes begin affecting these networks, balance often declines alongside cognitive efficiency. This relationship has become well documented inside neurology literature. Researchers now view subtle balance problems not only as mobility concerns, but sometimes as early neurological warning signs. And unlike many risk factors, balance can actually improve with training. Simple exercises such as standing briefly on one foot near a stable surface, controlled walking drills, or vestibular exercises can strengthen coordination pathways remarkably well. Even later in life, the nervous system retains a surprising degree of adaptability when challenged consistently. But while balance changes are visible externally, another major dementia risk factor develops almost completely unseen: visceral fat. This is not ordinary fat sitting directly under the skin. Visceral fat surrounds internal organs deep inside the abdomen, wrapping around the liver, pancreas, and intestines. A person may appear only slightly overweight externally while carrying dangerous levels of metabolically active visceral fat internally. And metabolically active is the critical phrase, because visceral fat continuously releases inflammatory chemicals into the bloodstream, day after day, year after year. Not dramatic inflammation with fever or visible illness. Chronic low-grade inflammation, silent inflammation, the kind that slowly damages blood vessels, disrupts insulin signaling, and weakens delicate neural structures inside the brain over decades. Visceral fat also drives insulin resistance, a condition where cells stop responding properly to insulin signals. Most people associate insulin only with blood sugar, but insulin also plays important roles inside the brain itself, supporting neuronal survival and communication between brain cells. When insulin resistance spreads through the body, the brain suffers too. Some researchers have gone so far as to describe Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes, because of how closely impaired glucose metabolism and neurodegeneration appear linked biologically. And now, even cholesterol has become part of the dementia conversation. For the first time, the 2024 Lancet Commission formally added high LDL cholesterol to its list of modifiable dementia risk factors. This represents a major shift in how vascular health and brain health are being understood together. Because the brain depends on blood vessels remaining healthy for decades, damaged arteries reduce oxygen delivery. Plaque buildup narrows circulation. Tiny vascular injuries accumulate silently until cognition begins deteriorating years later. Then come the earliest cognitive warning signs themselves. And one of the first systems often affected is language. People begin pausing longer to find words. Vocabulary narrows gradually. Sentences become simpler. Conversations lose complexity and precision over time. Families adapt slowly without recognizing the progression because the change develops gradually. But neurologists pay extremely close attention to these patterns. Not every forgotten word signals dementia. Everyone occasionally loses a thought or forgets why they entered a room. But repeatedly forgetting recent conversations, struggling with familiar names, losing track of event sequences, or simplifying speech noticeably over months may represent something far more significant. Clinically, these early stages may appear as mild cognitive impairment or subjective cognitive decline. Not dementia yet, but often the exact window where intervention becomes most valuable. And perhaps one of the most overlooked brain systems of all in modern life is spatial navigation itself. Because every time a person relies completely on GPS navigation, the hippocampus, one of the first brain regions heavily damaged in Alzheimer's disease, performs less independent spatial work. The brain slowly stops practicing orientation. The hippocampus is one of the most fragile and important structures inside the human brain. It helps create spatial maps, organize memory, and orient us within the world around us. It is also one of the first regions heavily damaged during the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And modern technology may be quietly reducing how often people actually use it. For thousands of years, humans constantly trained spatial memory naturally. Streets, landmarks, turns, distances, neighborhoods, routes home. The brain continuously built and updated internal navigation systems. Now many people outsource that task entirely to GPS. Turn left, turn right, continue straight. The brain follows instructions instead of constructing maps itself. Neurologists increasingly encourage adults, especially after 40 and 50, to occasionally navigate familiar routes without digital assistance whenever safely possible. Not because technology is evil, but because unused neural systems gradually weaken over time. The brain responds to challenge. And perhaps the most important message hidden inside all dementia prevention research is that the brain remains adaptable far longer than most people realize. This adaptability is called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to form new connections, strengthen existing pathways, and reorganize itself in response to learning and stimulation. Neuroplasticity is why lifelong learning matters so much. The Lancet Commission identified low educational attainment as a significant dementia risk factor. But this is not only about formal schooling or university degrees. It is about whether the brain continues being challenged throughout life. Learning a language, reading demanding literature, playing a musical instrument, writing by hand, drawing, solving problems, even engaging deeply in meaningful conversation. All of these activities force the brain to build and reinforce complex networks. One study found that reading serious fiction over several months produced measurable structural changes inside the brain associated with healthier cognitive function. Not passive scrolling through fragmented information. Literature demanding attention, empathy, imagination, and analysis. Reading aloud activates multiple language and auditory regions simultaneously. Writing by hand stimulates fine motor systems connected to broader cortical activity. Even hobbies such as knitting, painting, woodworking, or playing chess may help activate widespread neural circuits in ways passive entertainment often does not. Then there is emotional health, one of the most underestimated dementia risk factors in modern medicine. Depression is not simply sadness or a temporary emotional phase. It is a medical condition producing measurable biological effects inside the brain. Chronic depression increases inflammatory markers, disrupts neurogenesis, elevates stress hormones, and can even reduce hippocampal volume over time. Research now links depression to more than double the risk of later dementia development. And the relationship becomes viciously cyclical. Depression worsens cognition. Cognitive decline worsens depression. Both conditions reinforce one another silently unless treated. Persistent fatigue, low mood, emotional numbness, loss of motivation, disrupted sleep, withdrawal from activities once enjoyed. These symptoms deserve medical attention, not dismissal. And then come two lifestyle factors medicine has become increasingly direct about. Smoking and alcohol. Smoking damages blood vessels, increases oxidative stress, accelerates inflammation, and raises dementia risk substantially. Every cigarette affects circulation reaching the brain itself. Alcohol remains even more controversial because cultural myths surrounding healthy moderate drinking still persist widely. For years, people repeated the idea that small amounts of wine or liquor protected the heart and therefore somehow protected the brain. But current evidence-based medicine has shifted sharply away from that belief. Many researchers now argue there is no truly safe dose of alcohol neurologically. Even moderate regular drinking disrupts sleep architecture, increases brain atrophy over time, weakens lymphatic cleaning during sleep, and accelerates tissue degeneration gradually. The relaxing drink before bed may actually become a double attack against the brain. Poorer sleep, more inflammation, reduced neurological recovery, and perhaps what makes all these factors most dangerous is that they rarely operate alone. They compound together slowly for years before symptoms become obvious. Untreated hearing loss, poor sleep, sedentary lifestyle, alcohol, social isolation, depression. Each one alone may appear manageable. Together, they quietly reshape the future of the brain itself. There is a powerful case often discussed in clinical neurology because it reveals how dementia risk rarely comes from one catastrophic event. It comes from accumulation. A man in his late 50s began noticing subtle changes. He occasionally lost words during conversations. Sometimes he became disoriented while driving routes he had known for years. Nothing dramatic enough for family members to panic. Nothing severe enough to stop working. But underneath the surface, multiple risk factors had been quietly building for decades. Poor sleep, sedentary lifestyle, untreated hearing loss, nightly alcohol consumption, chronic stress. Each problem alone seemed manageable. Together, they formed the perfect neurological storm. His physicians did not promise miracle reversal. That is not how neurodegeneration works. But after multiple risk factors were addressed simultaneously, his cognitive decline stabilized significantly over the following 18 months. That single word matters enormously. Stabilized. Because the earlier intervention begins, the greater the chance of slowing the trajectory before severe degeneration fully develops. Timing changes everything. After age 40, age-related neurological changes begin accelerating. After 50, dementia risk approximately doubles every 5 years. This is why preventive action taken during midlife carries such profound long-term consequences. And perhaps the most important truth hidden inside all this research is that dementia prevention is not built around one magical supplement, one miracle exercise, or one perfect diet. It is built from systems. Protect hearing, protect sleep, protect circulation, protect movement, protect emotional health, protect learning, protect relationships. Because human cognition is not maintained by one organ operating alone. It emerges from an entire biological network functioning together over decades. This is why social connection remains one of the strongest protective factors ever identified. The famous Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest-running studies in medical history, found that the quality of close relationships strongly predicts both longevity and cognitive preservation. Not social media followers, not casual acquaintances, real human connection. Conversation, warmth, emotional closeness, shared experiences. The brain evolved socially. Isolation deprives it of emotional and cognitive stimulation it was biologically designed to receive. Then comes purpose. People who continue learning, creating, discussing ideas, solving problems, and remaining intellectually curious tend to preserve cognitive flexibility longer. The brain responds to challenge like muscle responds to resistance. It strengthens through use. Movement matters too. Even 10 minutes of daily physical activity measurably improves circulation, stimulates neurogenesis, reduces inflammation, and supports hippocampal health. The key is not perfection. It is consistency. And perhaps one of the most empowering realities in all modern dementia research is this. Many risk factors are modifiable. Not all dementia is preventable. Genetics, age, and certain diseases still play enormous roles. But 45% of global cases linked to modifiable risk factors represents millions of lives where the outcome may still be influenced before severe decline develops. That changes the conversation from helplessness to responsibility. Get hearing checked. Treat vision problems early. Protect sleep aggressively. Move every day. Reduce visceral fat. Control blood sugar and cholesterol. Stay socially engaged. Keep learning. Address depression. Stop smoking. Reduce or eliminate alcohol. Take subtle changes in speech, memory, and navigation seriously. Because the brain rarely collapses without warning. The warning signs usually appear quietly years earlier, disguised as normal aging, while damage slowly accumulates underneath. And the greatest tragedy may not be dementia itself. It may be how many people never realized intervention was still possible while there was still time to act. The future of the brain is not determined by one decision. It is shaped by thousands of repeated biological signals across an entire lifetime. and according to the strongest evidence modern neurology now possesses, many of those signals remain within human control far longer than people were ever taught to believe.